Hey there, my name is Memo. This is my channel, Houseplantygoodness, and essentially it's a place where I like to geek out about my big passion. You might be able to see behind me, it's tropical houseplants. So today is going to be a continuation of the plant review series, and it's a bit of a acrobatic one for me because I'm going to be talking about this glorious plant that you can see behind me, and I am currently standing on a stool because it's quite tall. It's behind me on a shelf. I don't want to move it. There's a lot of plants in front of it, and it is very heavy and attached to the top. I will see about getting you some close-up clips as well throughout this, but essentially today I'm going to be updating the review that I did on the Philodendron melanochrysum. And I know it's quite far away, but this plant has really sized up since my last review. I'll link my last review up here for the people that haven't seen it. But yeah, seems to be that a lot of people are enjoying these update reviews. So I thought I'd kind of roll with it with some of the plants that you really did kind of enjoy watching last time, just to see a bit of an update a year later. How the plant has changed. Has my opinion on the plant changed? Have I done anything new to take care of the plant? Have I discovered any kind of new intricacies? All of these things. But before we get into any of that, let's get into some ground rules. So if you're returning back, welcome back. It's nice to have you. And you know what to do down in the progress bar below. You can skip to your favorite topic if you want. And if you are new, welcome to the slight insanity that is this plant review series. And the ground rules are more for the kind of new people joining us. And it's more to kind of say that these reviews, there is no way that they can be unbiased. It is my biased opinion for my plant growing in my conditions, which is in a conservatory in the UK, whatever that might mean in terms of light, darkness, humidity, dryness, all of these things. So they might be slightly different from your experiences. But what I do encourage you all is if you've already got this plant and you want to share some of the experiences that you've had and how you've grown it, any kind of intricacies that you've had along the way, please do share in the comments down below. Try to be as descriptive as possible because for most people, they kind of want to know kind of what light it might be getting, how often you might be caring for it. Is there any intricacies that you found within your environment? Because their environment and their care might be very similar to the care that you are giving it. But yeah, without further ado, let's get into the first topic. So background with this plant, and it's an interesting one because I'm trying to remember now, I might need to refresh myself from the previous review as well. I think I did kind of explain to everybody how this came into my care, but if I'm not mistaken, this was an eBay purchase. Was it an eBay purchase? No, no, it wasn't an eBay purchase. This was a purchase from the Plant Den, which is an online store and a physical store that's local to me, but has since kind of closed down post kind of pandemic. And this was one that I did get in the pandemic. And this was one of the plants that came over from the kind of growers in the Netherlands. And we're seeing more and more of these come out recently. When I first got this, this was one of the first few batches that came in with plants that had relatively large leaves. I'm trying to think, that there was possibly the largest leaf, and it was probably about the size of my palm. And yeah, like it's kind of progressed from there. But yeah, this was an interesting one to get a hold of because this isn't one that I ever thought I was necessarily going to own because, and this might be an unpopular opinion, I don't mind velvety type plants, but I don't go out of my way to get velvety type plants. But you might be saying, especially the people that have been here for a while, but it's just like, hold on a minute. You've got the Anthurium warwickwianum or the Queen Anthurium. You've got the Philodendron gloriosum. You've got the melanochrysum. These are all velvety type not anthuriums, but plants generally. Yes, but I don't go out of my way. That is not a criteria that I judge in terms of what plant I want to maybe get. So this wasn't one that was high on my personal wish list for any number of years or months or anything like that. I know it is for a lot of people, but it was one that I just kind of came across. The price was good. I did take some cuttings from this and I tried to propagate it. I'll see if I can get some videos of the propagates now, nearly 2 years later, and they are still tiny. So we'll talk a bit more about that in the propagation section. But yeah, this has been an interesting one to grow because for me, I find that this one has some idiosyncrasies and some things that it needs in order for it to get large. Interestingly, these kind of level of foliage basically, and in terms of like the length, I don't want to pull it too far down because it can get a bit snappy. Uh, and for those that might be able to see, I don't know whether or not that's going to pick up. I'll see if I can get some clips. This isn't just on janky support sticks, and we'll talk a bit more in the accessories, but is also tied to the ceiling through really bad like wire plant ties. Plants unfiltered. The question of does this need a moss pole to grow happily? I prove that probably not. Will it appreciate a moss pole? And if you can give it one, should you? Probably yes. And you would probably get larger leaves faster because it will provide some substantial area roots actually. So this might be one. I'm really getting into doing a lot of air layering at the moment with a lot of my plants. This might be one that I might be air layering soon and maybe seeing if I can chop the top off because it's got some of the larger leaves and see if I can kind of grow it from there to get even larger. But yeah, I think that's everything I wanted to say in this background section. We might be having a change where the next section usually is speed of growth, but one of the lovely followers and viewers kind of said, you know what, you always kind of touch a bit on the availability side of things quite early on in your background section. Would it make more sense to move the availability section to be straight after the background? I said, yes, that makes sense. Let's give it a try for this video. If it's too jarring for all of you and you're kind of used to the way that everything was, because I am a creature of habit, I get that. Let me know in the comments down below and it could always revert to the old process. But yeah, let's move into the next topic. So availability on this one was as follows. I kind of touched on it briefly, but I got this from a plant store. It has become a lot more available even in the last year because I'm seeing a lot more of these coming out of the growers in the Netherlands, especially here in the UK. I would imagine it would be the same in Europe. Do let me know if that isn't the case if you're in Europe. But yeah, and they're all kind of pretty much, so I'm assuming the nurseries themselves have got like a preset size that the leaves need to be this long in order for us to sell it because they all look quite samey. There's usually 4 or 5 leaves on the plant, so it's a relatively established plant. You're not getting kind of something that's starting from a very small leaf. And let me tell you this, a few years back, the only way that you could get this, at least within the UK, is from cuttings on people, either online, whether or not they'd be rooted or unrooted, usually on places like eBay, maybe some Facebook groups, and you'd be getting tiny, tiny leaves and trying to grow it out. And essentially those leaves didn't look any different at that stage to a Philodendron micans. But obviously you can see the more it matures, the larger the leaves can get. Yes, there was a bit of controversy with this specific plant as well, because you could get very, very large, established, mature specimens, usually from the Far East when you would be importing. Whether or not all of those plants, this is a controversial bit, were actually grown by the growers there, or whether or not they were just poached out of nature, I don't know. There's a lot of questions that were asked about those massive, massive specimens because it's not as if those growers would have known 3, 4, 5 years ago when they were first starting off with this plant that it was going to get as big as it was and they held it back in order to sell it for more money. Don't get me wrong, some of them might have done. But it is one that it's usually the case, and I'm not going to do a sweeping generalization, but if you're getting a stupidly mature plant, one that would be that huge only probably in nature after several years, you do need to ask yourself the question of, did the grower grow it? Did the grower just pick it up from outdoors. And they really shouldn't be doing. Basically, shouldn't be poaching plants. They should be growing it in an ethical environment within kind of their businesses. But rant over. Uh, but yeah, so it is nice to see some of these coming out from the Netherlands. Did that mean that the price dropped dramatically? Dramatically? Dramatically or drastically? Dramatically. There you go. New word for the day. But yes, the price did drop considerably kind of when the ones that started coming out of the Netherlands did start coming out of the Netherlands, because they weren't selling for quite as much as you probably would have been able to find similar sized plants before. So before you would have been looking at kind of low to mid, depending on the size, triple digits. When I got this was mid towards high mids, double digits. And it was a decent sized plant. And I'll see if I can find a picture from my plant care app when I first got it and add it here. I don't know how good that picture might be, but yeah, it has come down drastically in price, and I keep seeing it reduce even further. Like if I look at the prices now, they are even lower here basically. So it comes back to what I usually say with to people for most of these plants that do get this kind of trend happening around them and everybody wants them. If you can hold off for a few months, maybe a couple of years, you can probably afford it because it will drop significantly in relation to the price that it might have been when everybody wanted it. There is something to be said that it won't always happen for all plants, because some plants, there's only a select handful of people that will ever want those plants. So the demand isn't ever high enough for them to flood the market enough for the prices to drop down quickly. Those are different. I'm not going to go into that too much right now. But yeah, these have become, at least I kind of enjoy saying that these have become a lot more available. And I know that these are the plants that a lot of people did want. So that is a good thing. So moving into speed of growth. So this is an interesting one because out of a lot of my philodendrons and a lot of the plants that I grow, even in my conservatory, usually I've noticed that if I take a cutting to propagate, and I'll come into propagation in just a moment, but if I take a cutting to propagate, a lot of the times that mother plant gets knocked back a bit and it takes a while for it to reset and then start growing again. This one, out of a lot of my plants in here, basically, I find takes the longest to recover from that cut, which is why I was saying at the beginning of this video that considering that I'm doing a lot of air layering for a lot of my plants right now, whether or not this is one of the plants that I want to try doing the air layering and see if it stresses out the plant any less. Because this has got very specific kind of needs when it comes to watering, but again, I'll touch on that in the accessories and care. But generally speaking, so again, let me benchmark it, the updated benchmark from last year's review. So if a golden pothos will grow 2 to 3 leaves in the growing period, so in the summer here in the UK, in a month, how many would this grow? I would say maybe one. Well, I mean, it depends because I've got two growth points now, and that happened from the last cut that I did. It branched out, I think. So it's nice when you kind of look back on it and just go, did it branch out? Yes, it did. Because I can see that there was only one stem in the soil originally, and there's still only one stem in the soil. So it branched out. But yeah, it's being held up by a lot at the moment. So yeah, this is one that at that stage in the summer might have a leaf, 2 leaves, because I've got the thing. So about a leaf a month. In the winter, one every 2 months, so a leaf every couple of months. And yeah, this isn't, I have to say, this isn't one of my fastest growing philodendrons, but you can see where it is kind of very high up on the conservatory. For those that are wondering, I love it. I saw it recently being mentioned this, but I've done kind of bubble wrap around the inside of the conservatory to keep the warmth in and to keep the cold out, because energy crisis and prices are ridiculous at the moment, and this conservatory leaks air and like warmth really badly. But I think somebody was mentioning the bubble wrap, because people started using it in their homes, which is kind of bleak times that we're all living at the moment. This used to be something that people just used to put in greenhouses. They called it bubble glazing. So I'm running with that. That's bubble glazing on the ceiling. But it gets a lot of light, is the point I'm trying to make. And actually, it's quite close to that top, which means in the summer it can get very, very hot. In the winter, it can get very, very cold. And it doesn't seem to affect it too much. But yeah, not the fastest growing plant or even philodendron for me. I will say that even for a philodendron, I find that this can be quite slow growing. I will say, however, that when it's knocked back after I've taken a cutting and I've got the smaller leaves, I will get more of those happening faster. But when you start getting these larger type leaves, it can be quite slow. And also, you might be able to see, no, it is picking up there. So this is a new leaf that is going to start unfurling now. I mean, it's this small, it's coming off some of these other big, big leaves. So I'm assuming that will also become a lot larger. But this actually does make a good point. From the moment that the leaf starts emerging, especially if you've got the bigger leaves, I find that this plant, at least for me in my care, takes a bit of time for the leaf to fully unfurl. And after it's unfurled, it takes a long time for it to harden off. I think this leaf here or this one's still technically hardening off, I think, at the moment. But this took nearly 2 months, which is the leaf directly after this one. This took nearly 2 months to unfurl, and it's still hardening off 2.5 months later. So yes, I will say that you can see how grey it is today, and apologies if the video is quite dark. I have got quite a few lights on me, but blighty. Yeah, it's a plant that does take a while to harden off. The caveat that I was going to say here is I don't know. I'm trying to think now. I don't know if this gets any faster in the summer when there's more light. So it might be only this slow now because of the season that we're in at the moment. But yeah, I think that's everything I wanted to say on this topic. Let's move on. So ease of propagation with this one. I'm not going to lie, this has not been the easiest philodendron or easiest plant generally for me to propagate. And I will give you a bit more info on that. It's not necessarily that that cuttings that I've taken have failed in the process of propagation and didn't start to root out or just kind of died back. That wasn't the case. So this isn't one that I found a lot of failure in that respect. I did find with this one, whether I put it to propagate in water or in damp sphagnum moss in a grow box, basically, in a propagation box, it's slow. It's not necessarily slow to root out. It does kind of root out at kind of around the same speed as you would get with most of your climbing philodendrons. However, I will say it's very, very slow to go into kind of leaf production or kind of consecutive leaf productions. But again, it might just be relating to the fact that it's slow generally to bring out new leaves and harden them off. I will hopefully be adding in a video somewhere around here of a propagation that's been going for 2 years. Granted, I will say a few things. I haven't given it a moss pole. It was only ever on a support stick. It has probably had rot a couple of times because it's been in different media. So I've had it in soil. It's now in pond, which seems to be at its happiest. Interestingly, the mother plant is still in my aroid mix in a terracotta pot. But yeah, so it's a tricky one. I could not tell you 100% with this plant that, you know what, do this, this, and this, and this, and 9 times out of 10, it will work. It is with this one, try with your plant in your environment and see what works best for you. It's probably not helpful. Probably needed me to say a bit more kind of concrete on this section, but it's not that straightforward, or at least it hasn't been for me. So if you know for a fact that you've got the method down pat for the Philodendron melanochrysum, do drop it in the comments down below. I am sure a lot of people, including myself, would like to know what your thoughts and experiences have been. But yeah, I mean, it will start going. As I said, you don't get that much failure. The roots are decent. It's just keeping it happy. And the other thing that I will say is light levels when you're propagating. So this is an interesting one because, as you can tell here, it's quite high up. And yes, there is some damage from light. And I'm trying to see, oh, we're going to have things to talk about in the pest section because Bebe's spotted pests. But yeah, it is one of these plants that when it's propagating, at least I found that even more so than the average plant when it's propagating, it needs slightly lower light levels. I found the higher the light levels, I gave it, the more it would bleach out the leaves, or it would kind of sacrifice the leaf entirely and start again from the chunk. The kind of medium light, medium to bright indirect is kind of where it sits, where it needs to sit, for me at least, when I've been propagating. But that might just be me. If you disagree, let me know. So coming into pests, and as I was mentioning earlier on, I have spotted some pests, and this is the main pest type that I will see generally on this plant, which is spider mites. Spider mites, it is definitely very much a velvet leaf plant in that respect. Most spider mites tend to love velvety leaves, so this one is no exception at all. Do I occasionally get some mealybugs, as I am seeing at the moment? Yes. Do I get a lot of mealybugs? No. They tend to congregate with this plant very much around the point of the petiole, where the petiole will meet the actual leaf itself. So that's a point usually where you just need to kind of keep an eye out for, because you're likely to find a couple of mealybugs. Did this plant have any issues with whitefly? No. Did this plant occasionally have an issue? I know this isn't technically a pest, with edema. Yes. Like my Philodendron gloriosum, this is one of the other ones that I've only ever had it once, but it did happen with this plant. But those are the kind of big ones. Have I ever had a thrip infestation on this? Touch wood, no. So predominantly the heavy ones that you're going to really be seeing, at least I have been in my experience on this plant, is going to be the spider mites. The occasional mealybug, as I said, but predominantly keep an eye out for spider mites. And generally what I'll do with this, and it's because this is the time that this plant will get the spider mites in my care for me, is in the winter, because I don't have my predatory mite satchels living on the plant and getting replaced every 2 or 3 months because it's too cold for them right now. However, yeah, this is one that in the summer pretty much gets though quite a few of those satchels on it, and I generally don't have to worry too much about spider mites. This is, as I said, the time where I will get spider mites. Generally will be just this time before spring, where it's starting to maybe get a bit warmer in here because of my radiators and all of these things, and also the weather might slowly be starting to heat up. I say this knowing full well I live in the UK and we're still in February. We have still got to go through fake spring, back to winter, back to another fake spring, to maybe some spring, and then into summer. So people that live here know what I'm talking about. Um, but yeah, so soon this will be dealt with. I'll deal with the spider mites now, obviously, but as I was saying, if you can maybe, if you're comfortable with predatory insects, spider mite satchels, spider mite predator satchels work exceptionally well on this, even more so than maybe on some of the alocasias. So top tip there. So coming into accessories and care for this one, this is an interesting one because you might be able to see, and I'll see if I can grab some clips because you probably, this is quite far back and I'm quite high up and still trying to balance on the stool just because at least I can get the plant in shot. And I'm trying to think in terms of height, looking at it now, and I don't know what it is in imperial, but I do know it in metric. This plant is probably close to 1.5 meters tall now. So it is getting tall. The shelf is a bit lower than what you can see in the screen. So yes, there is 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 janky support sticks holding it up. There is a trellis leaning against it so it can hold it up. And there is the plant ties tying it to the ceiling. This needs a moss pole. This also definitely does need to, like, the more I think about it, the more I'm convincing myself this definitely needs to get air layered, chopped back, just so it can kind of be a bit more stable. Because I will say this, and again, I'd be really curious to know if anybody's had any experiences with this other than just constantly chopping it back and propagating it, chopping it back and propagating it. I find this really interesting, and this is one that definitely does it for philodendron. The actual stem that comes out of the ground never gets any thicker, so it's probably only about as thin as my pinky finger, but the stem at the very top is almost as thick as my thumb. So there is a size difference, and it is a lot heavier, and that's why I always try to support it as much as I possibly can, because that tiny little bit at the bottom is holding up a lot of plant, basically. So yeah, and again, I can hear the comments. I know what you're going to say, and I do agree. If there is a moss pole, that will give it the most amount of support, and the actual other sections where the aerial roots would go into the actual moss pole as well would probably benefit from it. One of the things that I have done heavily this weekend, it was a good weekend because it's not very often these days with how busy I am with kind of work and everything else and the puppy and filming and all of these things, to actually just take a moment and enjoy my collection and do some plant chores just for the sake of doing some plant chores. So I've been meaning to do, and I do not know what they are called, but they're the kind of DIY moss poles where you've got the clear plastic in the back, and then you stuff it with the moss, and then you've got the mesh in the front, and you kind of stick it in, and it's kind of like, I'm describing this really badly, but for the people that know, I'm hoping you get what I mean. That was fun, and this one will definitely need one of those. Question for you: if you've done a lot of those moss poles, they take, like the big ones, like something like this, would take a lot of moss. And moss, because I want to use the better stuff, is not that cheap. Do you add things in so it's not just moss? So it kind of maybe brings down the cost a bit. And obviously, moss can be quite tricky. It's not something that you can easily find in most stores. I know you can get it online, but is there anything you do to kind of doctor your moss pole so it's not just moss? And does that work for you? So, sorry, random question, but let me know. But yeah, I think that's the predominant thing on this. As I said before when I was talking about the pests, those predatory spider mite satchels do work a charm on this. Giving it something like a moss pole. And again, I've said it and I will say it again, the janky support sticks have worked well. The question here becomes is, if I had originally given this a moss pole, would it have grown faster and bigger for me? Possibly. But again, the people that have been here for a while, I'm kind of pretty much at capacity in this space at the moment. So do I know that this is a plant that if I gave it the right care, it would probably be large and in charge, and probably the leaves might be maybe as large as my esmeraldens, which I'm seeing in the corner there? Possibly. Is this a plant that I liked enough in order for me to sacrifice that much space? Because I would need to get rid of potentially another very mature and established plant for it to have its space. Maybe not. Done it for my esmeraldens, and I would happily do it again because that plant gives me a lot of joy. And generally speaking, is what I was saying before, I'm not that fussed on velvety plants. And it probably is because I know that they can have their own set of issues. I do still like my kind of leathery foliage. As long as it's a bit more interesting, then I'm here for that. But I don't mind the kind of velvety leaves, but it's not my big thing, basically. But yes, before I go too far off topic, let's move into, I think, final thoughts. So, final thoughts on this one, and I will put up a score of what I had scored it on my previous video. But before we get to the scoring, I'll do the same question like a year later now, still. Knowing what I know now, if I didn't own this plant, would I purchase this plant? Probably yes. I mean, I still enjoy it. It's still, when the leaves start getting this much larger, they're a lot more imposing. I wouldn't have got it if it's starting off from a tiny baby leaf that looks no different than a Micans, because I can imagine that would take a very long time to get to this. So potentially getting a plant that has those kind of medium-sized leaves will give you a bit of a leg up. I would also know that it's a bit of a time investment and potentially do things slightly differently. But yes, a very, very long way of me saying, yes, I would probably get this plant knowing what I know now. Even with all the slight kind of issues and intricacies, yes, I probably would. Now, in terms of the scoring, hopefully I've still got the score at the top there of what I scored it last time. I would say this plant, for me, sits solidly. There was a point before it started to like size up on the leaves in the last few months where it was still, for me, it was so blah for me after as long as I've had it. It was maybe a 6, maybe a 7 on a good day. Because of those slightly larger leaves now, I will give this between a 7 and an 8. It won't get much higher than that. An 8 if I'm really, really good on that day. I know there's probably a lot of you screaming at your screens right now because this is a plant that is loved by many people. But for me, it's good. Don't get me wrong, it's good. It's good. How do I quantify this? It's good. It's not one that I would give to somebody for free just so I can get rid of it. No, I would still want it in my collection, but it's a good plant to have for me, but doesn't set my world on fire, basically. Yeah, I think on on that remark, I might let you get off and enjoy the rest of your day. Hopefully, you enjoyed. Hopefully, I shall see you here soon, and I truly, truly hope that you have a great rest of your day. Thanks. Bye.